All righty, here we go. We're live. It's episode 15, Stick to F1 podcast. Anthony Mangione, Jason Martinez. We're doing it live once again, post-qualifying at Zandvoort. Lots to discuss, including Spa and a win from 14th on the grid, and a lot to get to on this episode. In the middle, the meat of the sandwich of the three straight races, Monza next week, but we'll concentrate on Spa and Zandvoort today. What's going on, Ant? What'd you take out of quali?
I took out a quali that no matter what issues Max Verstappen may have with his gearbox in practice, invariably Red Bull's such a well-oiled machine, they'll get that thing picked up, and Max will be able, even with all of, all the good form that Ferrari showed, in practice, leading practices this weekend, and we get to quali, but again in the big run. Charles kind of made a couple errors there in the middle part of his Q3 run and ends up not on pole, and then everything gets shut down after Checo's crash. But once again, feels like it's the Max Verstappen show.
Yeah,
I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it is. You're watching.
They're dominant.
You're watching a dominant performance of a perfect marriage of driver and team. To me, that's what I'm saying right now.
My biggest takeaway is that no matter where you are in the world, there are idiot sports fans. For the schmuck that threw a flare onto the track.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd have red flag it. I mean, the only guy on the track was Albon at that point, but still, it's just idiocy. And they're all supposed to turn in the flares. They're going to sneak them in, but to throw it on the track is like extra douchebag move.
To me, it was almost like, okay, this is my this is my protest or something. So I'm gonna mess us, which makes to me no sense. But again, if you're loaded beyond all belief, which I'm probably sure this guy was in terms of consumption, the inhibitions go away, and you can see it's interesting. You saw the crowd turn around.
Yeah,
a lot of people, like for everybody who complained about Max fans, said. You looked at that crowd; they were all dressed in their orange. Nobody had it. Everybody was adhering to it. I did see at the very beginning of quali, it looked like someone had opened something, and there was some sort of. Now I couldn't tell if somebody maybe was vaping in the crowd or something like that, but it was a white sort of puff, and I was like, "Did some idiot? Is somebody about to do this?" And then when we saw, but I said it was a white one, so it wasn't. So that's when I assumed it wasn't a flare. And then when I saw it on the track afterwards, and I was, when the guy threw it, I was just like. You knew this was going to happen. There's always, for however many 100,000 are there at Zandvoort, there's always the one idiot.
Yep. No matter where you are in the world, there's always an idiot. Mm-hmm. Let's go back real quick to the week prior and Spa, because it was the race of engine penalties and penalties on the grid. It was such an upside down grid because Verstappen and Leclerc and so many guys were starting way back in that grid, out of position. But it was like a hot knife to butter, at least for Max. A little bit of bad luck for Charles in the sense that he gets that tear off into his brake duct. It forces him to then pit under the safety car, and really he's not able to slice through the field like he was initially, or he would have been able to. Max before the safety car goes from 14, essentially 13, because Gasly started from the pit lane, but right up to 8th. He stayed really patient on that opening lap, made sure he stayed out of trouble. And there was some trouble in front of him.
He said that. It was some definite, we saw, certainly there were several things, even off the jump of the race there. It was that would have made things a little bit difficult, which is one of the reasons why I was kind of like, it may take him a little bit to get there. But again, it's Spa, and it has its own technical things about it, but it's one of those things where, and George Russell said this before the race, that he thinks that Red Bull could win this race comfortably starting from that spot. And you could say that's talk, but I mean, I think that track there's just the way that track is designed, it's allowed for that. So it wasn't incredibly surprising to me to see Max pretty much moving up as quickly as he did, but to win it again, the dominant level of fashion that he won that race was just. That car was again. They came out of that break, and that car is dialed. He in the car that whole weekend. That's all what we're talking about is just like his pace is absurd on that circuit. It was absolutely absurd. So it was
like his car was in hot lap endless ERS, and nobody had any ERS the whole race.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
Exactly. But I was happy. One thing I was going to say is that I was happy as well, though, because the discussing this grid, upside down grid, it did give a few racers who had not had point opportunities and have been getting buried. Some of them were able to, obviously, at the end of that race, to stick the landing. Namely, Alex Albon was able to hold on for P10, so that was good to see. And the Williams actually looked pretty good in that race.
A lot of straight line speed.
Yeah, Seb also, I believe Seb also, I think that he also pointed. He was 8th in the race. He started up 6th, I think, finished 8th still in that Aston Martin. I mean, as he's getting ready for the final, this will be now 8 races left of his career.
Yeah,
I'm hoping to see a few moments for Seb where he's banking points and go out, feeling good.
Yeah. And it was good to see him too. He was mixing it up, and he kind of pushed Stroll off on lap 1 into the gravel, but Stroll collected it and kept it on the rails. And the big incident on the first lap was about Hamilton and Alonso, and I just don't think that. And I think Lewis spoke to it, that he didn't see him there. He was kind of in his blind spot. He turned in on him, and the wheels just kind of flipped his car up, and just too much damage to Hamilton's car. And Alonso on the team radio.
45G. It was a 45. They measure it was 45G, that crash. I mean, it went up and down. I mean, that's
there's no suspension on these cars. It's not
exactly. You feel it's like getting dropped to earth.
Yeah.
With no parachute. So
200 miles an hour almost, about 160, I guess, at that point under braking. But and when Alonso came on the team radio and said, this guy only knows how to race in the front or start from the front. That's because he did for so long. But that
was frustration. But I know they made nice over this weekend. Everybody saw the picture with Alonso.
Yeah, he went down to
and I expected that. At the end of the day, these two are not going to be. I think there's mutual. I always will say I believe there's absolute mutual respect of their racecraft between each other. But they're not sending each other Christmas cards.
No.
I don't think the two of them. I don't think either of the two history. Each other. Even there's a lot of history. They were teammates long ago, and I don't think they like each other. But they wanted to make sure to quash the thing here before the next race. And let's not forget as well with and I don't want to sort of do any conspiracy theories or anything, but remembering the fact that Fernando Alonso is going to Aston Martin next year, and it's a Mercedes power unit that's in that car.
Yep.
Make no mistake, the politics were probably very much in play there for him to at least make the public show of Apollo.
The olive branch.
He make the olive branch, and he did. To his credit, I mean, he could have been. At the end of the day, he could have just said no. I said I said what I said and deal with it. But he was I think it is a heat. I did see it as a heat of the moment comment, but there's definitely a shade of the truth / resentment.
It's like when you have a couple drinks and you start saying things that you wouldn't say sober. It doesn't mean they're not your beliefs. It just means that you needed some lubrication to get there.
Yeah, and Lewis knows that. And the thing is, we know as soon as Lewis's reaction was like this is not. He's like, I'm not going to say anything. He was except the apology. I think they probably said it was like, he's coming over. We need to make nice. So go make
this look good for the manufacturer.
Exactly.
And they did. The funny thing too about that race is we've talked about it ad nauseum about Ferrari and their decisions. And once again, with Leclerc, there's some really sketchy decision making to go for that fastest lap, which they weren't going to get anyway. Even if it was a clean lap and he didn't have to re-overtake Alonso, then he gets the speeding in the pit lane 5-second penalty, which drops him the spot. He ends up, net negative on this attempt to get a single point. It's the bird in the hand is worth one in the bush, and once again, they make a strategic error. And that's, as much as I don't know that Charles is ready to compete for a world title because he has stuff to learn about, the patience of a season. Ferrari certainly has a lot to learn in that regard, and they just keep shooting themselves in the foot.
They do, and I saw Carlos Sainz talking about defending Ferraris. This is we make a lot of good decisions, and nobody those aren't publicized, and I'm like, that's good loyal. That's being a good loyal employee, Carlos. But at the end of the day, when you're all of a sudden fighting for a championship, those mistakes get magnified. If Mercedes makes that mistake, they hear it all the time. If Red Bull makes a mistake like that, they're going to hear it. So you
Yep.
guys, unfortunately, have had quite a pile up of errors this year that has cost your team the opportunity to, you go from a 46-point lead to where they're at now. And I mean, granted, it was early in the season and you don't count anything over at that point, but it's just the whole season just seems to be a case of watching a well-oiled machine in Red Bull with a driver who is driving with utter confidence, versus a Ferrari team that you and I have discussed this so many times. We love this car. I love the 75. I really do, despite the whole obviously reliability issue at times where the power unit is gone. It's got monster speed. It's the one car on the grid that I think that is able to challenge the Red Bull, but too many unforced errors.
Yeah,
just are.
Driver and more so team.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it makes the situation tougher for Charles because. Especially Charles, I think even more so than Carlos, but Charles especially feels the eyes on him, and he's pushing it, and even if he makes so much as a little bit of an iota, his margin for error is so razor thin. And the problem is it's no longer about the championship. They know that. I mean, even Charles discussed that last week, that it's not that's not likely. Now it's about the Silver Arrows who are gaining on them. And it would be, I look at it this way, if they manage to pull the final 8 races and Ferrari finishes P2 in the championship, I'll consider the season to be not a disaster. I'll consider it to be solid. You made progress. You went from P3 to P, you've been progressing up. You're up to P2. And you were able to keep the 8-time defending world champions at bay. And in that respect, to me, it would be a B grade season, despite all the errors, because that would be tough. If Mercedes overtakes them, and again, I think there's a very, very, very good chance. I don't bet, but if I was putting money down right now, someone says, you got to make a bet or your life. I would feel far more confident putting my money behind Mercedes than I would be for Ferrari.
Yeah, even with only 8 Grand Prix left, it's amazing to say that. It was my kind of bold second half prediction in last week's episode. Mm-hmm. But all said and done, Max gets it done. It's a 1-2 for Red Bull. Max with the fastest lap. He maximizes, gets the 26 points. Red Bull now in the constructors, 475 points. Ferrari 357. And 3 is Mercedes at 316. We'll see if they can close that gap this weekend. They look like they've got some pace here as well. So let's look at Zandvoort, because it was kind of a scrappy couple of days for Verstappen in free practice. One with the gearbox issue, and then even in FP2, he's kind of trying to play catch up a little bit and get a lot of laps in. Had a good soft tire run, but all said and done, wasn't really at the top of the leaderboards. And he comes into qualifying today and puts up a couple of really good laps and had the pace once again when it mattered. And maybe he would have been knocked off provisional pole by Hamilton had Checo not spun there in turn 13. But Max once again ends up starting right at the front of the grid, right like he did last year at Zandvoort, and he dominated that race last year.
It's tough. And again, this as we discussed before with regards to how Zandvoort is structured, even with the extended DRS zone starting at the banking turn heading into the start finish. So there may be some opportunities for overtaking a little sooner, potentially on the straight versus going into turn one. The thing was I noticed about Max with the practice was he seemed to be struggling on turn 3 the most.
Yeah,
I think he was struggling. But I think in some ways that helped because again he likes to there's different ways to attack that turn. Max likes to start from the top. I've noticed that he likes to he wants to get himself up high, almost like a roller coaster, and then fire down it. Whereas others kind of bank it maybe a little bit sooner than that and try to get to the midway point. I do think he's got something. I think again, the way his car's probably, the way it's set up, he probably figures strategy wise, he does get more from there. But several times I saw during practice where he just had a skittery exit during practice. But again, the computing brain that he has, he's like, okay, I can't get it here. Get it here. Let me try in this spot. And then he invariably ends up finding that he ends up finding that spot that ends up where he ends up taking off from the Tarzan turn. And then he's off. And I get into the fact that we've discussed before again, Zandvoort, higher downforce track, although Setup's probably, again, we'll see how things go. But again, we know how it's set up. Cars don't go, for the most part, don't go full throttle till you get to probably the start finish straight. There's just no place for you to be able to.
Well, the DRS zone right in sector 3 to begin sector 3, you
That's
get a little flat out there, but it's
even
not very
then,
long.
it's still narrow enough. You could get there, but then you find yourself literally maybe a second or two, and then you're immediately hitting the brakes and dropping gear. And that's part of what goes into it. So there's opportunities. I always figured that last sector 3 thing, that curve, when you get to there, that's an over, but it's narrow. It's very narrow to attempt an overtake, and you're going to end up in the gravel, even with the new setup of the gravel being sort of encased on right at the edge of the track.
Yeah.
But it's very slippery, and then the gravel's further in. That was one of the developments, the new developments that they put this year on Zandvoort, where they had some sort of polymer adhesive that they put. And they said the worries are you can be able to cheat off of that, and they're like, no, because it's so damn slippery. The minute you put your tire on that, you're going to spin.
Yeah.
So, it's still, I thought maybe when they did that, it was going to be like, okay, this might give somebody a chance to get a tire up off the thing and then somehow pull an overtake, and that's fine. But you really can't. The minute you put your tire on that, it's going to be like driving on ice.
Yeah. And, that's a quick right into a left too. So it's inside, outside, or outside, inside. So how to take that in a narrow part of the track as well, even though
it's all about the exit. Yeah, it's all about the exit to get to the end and make to the turn and then get to the bank.
Yeah. That DRS zone is more designed to get you closer to the car in front of you so you can try and overtake them on the main straight in that DRS zone.
They talked about this last year too, Jace. I mean, I remember them having a discussion about this, but they didn't feel the previous model cars, they really heavy down, these cars obviously with the downforce kind of naturally produced in this case versus having
the floor.
They just worried the cars were going to fly. It was just going to be a mess. This year, they felt much more confident with it.
Checo last year started from the pit lane, and he had like 10 overtakes into that last chicane.
Yeah.
I mean, he just kept getting work done there, and it was not a spot where you'd think you'd be able to get a lot of work. Sure.
But again, we're talking about a driver in Checo who he's good in these kind of tight quarters. When you get into flat out long straights and paces and things of that sort, I think, like say, for example, on his own home track, he's had his moments where he's had some success, but he's also struggled too, because that straight is so long that he ends up sometimes losing time. Whereas
you can smoke a cigarette down that straight.
Right. We talk about Monaco and Azerbaijan and Zandvoort as well. It's almost like some people refer to it. They don't say it's Monaco without the walls, but it's it can have its moments. It's tight.
Yeah,
it's tight.
It is an absolute roller coaster. It's a fun track to watch these cars navigate too. It's just it's wild what kind of goes on, the undulations and the hills and up and down and winding turns. No two turns are
the sand too. Let's
similar in any way.
And Jace, you also have the abrasiveness that the wind picks up.
Yeah,
it's on a beach.
The ocean.
It's right on the beach.
And the sand.
The wind, the sand is big. I mean, listen, the whole thing at Zandvoort literally is like sand is sand. It's Dutch for that. So
Sandfort.
Sandfort. That's exactly, call it that. And that's another factor you got to get, especially if the weather changes and you're right on the ocean, and it's possible it can, and the wind suddenly picks up. That you got to be even more careful. Even if it doesn't rain, if you get enough wind to pick up a little bit of sand to put on the track, that's all other kinds of tire issues you're going to have.
Well, I remember in Spain earlier this year, 2 guys went off the track just because a gust of wind came in. Carlos Sainz just dropped it going into turn 5. And then a couple of laps later, Verstappen dropped it going into turn 5.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
it goes uphill again. That turn also at Barcelona also goes up. It's one of those things. It's so long going up.
Yeah.
And if you get a gust of wind and you're literally trying to get that thing just right so you can exit and get down all the way, and if you get a gust of wind and you're trying to do that,
lose the rear. Yep. And around you go. And yeah, it's like a big wind sail too with those cars. So the wind could be a factor. We'll see what the weather's like come tomorrow for the Grand Prix, but I'm looking forward to it. I think the grid is really interesting. Max up front, Leclerc sitting in second. This has kind of been chalk those two at the front of the grid all year long, even though Leclerc's got more poles than Verstappen this season. Sainz then starting third. So you have two Ferraris taking on the Red Bull to try and drive strategy. So it's going to be imperative that Leclerc and Sainz get a good start and keep Hamilton behind them, because he's starting P4. He's got pace here. So when you get to the pit stop window, Ferrari's best chance here is to either be in a Ferrari sandwich for Red Bull or for Leclerc and Sainz to be together behind him to really put one car on a different strategy and get that early stop to put an undercut in play. Because the end about will play here.
Or pray for problems for Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing for everybody right now. I think at this point now, in just about every race, it's like, pray Verstappen something doesn't quite work for him, because if he starts and he takes off, it's over already.
Yeah, if he gaps you early, forget it.
Exactly. And this course, I think, tighter racing by its very nature will occur. Just because I always feel like Spa and Monza next week are always races where you can just take off and be gone, by the nature of how those courses are designed. So for me, for them, they've got to be careful. They've got to guard. This is Ferrari's fight now. Ferrari has to have their eyes really on the arrows, on silver arrows at this point now, because that's in the final 8 races. That's who their fight is. And if they finished P3 this year, like last year, we were applauding them for finishing P3, but that literally was because of the disaster of 2020.
Yeah.
But now things have changed, and they started off strong, and to finish P3 after the start that they had this season, it isn't 2020 bad, but it magnifies, especially when you've got, and again, love the car, love the drivers, but if you don't have the operation running tightly behind them, and I'm not gonna say they're not running tightly. It's just when you get to those critical decision moments, the strategy just not quite. Again, not understanding it. Again, I understand the idea of desperately trying to get, Charles that extra point, but it just, the timing of it, even Charles questioned it. Like, what's the why?
Yeah. What are we doing here?
What are we doing?
Well, the thing we don't know going into this too, because these new cars on this track, and what we don't know is what the tire deck is going to be like, and who is going to be kinder on their tires on a circuit that asks a ton of their tires. So, how are guys going to start? Are they going to start on mediums? Are they going to start on hards? I imagine up front they're going to start on mediums.
To maintain a gap. It's the hardest. It's the hardest compound in this race. It's the C1. To me, the hard would be like skating.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough tire to fire up.
Exactly. You're trying to get that thing going at the very beginning of that race. I mean, I could see some of the back marker cars possibly trying to do it just to try to stretch things out a bit. But even then,
a safety car.
I think they're going to be exactly, and hope for, again, pray for a safety car. Now, to me, this is immediate. This is going to read as this is a C2 start to me. It has to be a C2 start, because I feel like, you could start potentially on the sauce, but you're going to be changing, I think, in pretty short order on this track. I agree. Yeah. And,
the other thing is, you look at this qualifying session, Lando ends up, P7 in qualifying. Mm-hmm. And Daniel Ricciardo, boy, he just looks like a shell of himself at this point. And I know Martin Brundle said that he looks like a beaten man, essentially. And he goes out in Q1 here, 17th. I mean,
he was 18th. Was it 18th? I thought he would finish 18th.
He ended up finishing 17th.
Oh, they changed.
Magnussen was behind him.
Oh, yeah, because I think they hit him with that's right, because they hit Magnussen with I think he got hit with track limits. So
in turn 3.
Still, it's like, okay, one extra spot. It's okay.
Yeah.
But for Danny, we're getting into a very interesting thing, because obviously that's the other big news story that we probably need to discuss as well, is the CRB officially announcing that that Oscar Piastri's contract with McLaren was the legal contract. So, but then the detail comes out of when the contract was agreed to, which was July 4th.
Yeah,
and that basically and that we all know what that means. And it means Danny went out on the 13th of July with the post and saying, I'm committed to the for the rest of the season. Now, you could be cynical. You can use the single point and say, well, he's saying that publicly because he wants to make sure, as we get to the settlement portion of him leaving, he gets everything that he was supposed to get in his contract, which reportedly he is. He's going to get whatever he was paid from last year. There's a lot of other ugly stuff that seems to be going on with this thing too. I mean, apparently, we're seeing it kind of a back and forth. What Piastri said, things were with Otmar in terms of what was publicly said while he was in the simulator. That was released, I think, today, and how uncomfortable he felt, even though he supposedly said, that I've told them that I wasn't going to be coming back. So it's like, who do you believe in this circumstance? And I don't know. And again, somewhere that it just, they knew. It's almost like they know they were losing him and they just got caught flat-footed with, and they were hoping that what it speaks to, I think, more than anything, Jason, is the communication structure at Alpine and Renault needs to get much better. If Otmar didn't know,
yeah, the optics of this are horrible.
How does he not know again? And then going to the whole statement previously, which we talked about last week about integrity, that Otmar, mentioned with Piastri, and then Zach Brown firing back and saying, well, you were running Racing Point with the pink Mercedes and got hit in the field. And does it add spice to the whole Alpine versus McLaren rivalry? Oh, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a spice. It's I'm sure. Then I know they said, I think going into Spa, that the Netflix cameras were all over Alpine, McLaren, Aston, that whole.
Great.
That's where everything, the genesis of all
the action,
where the action is right now.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting too, because reportedly Alpine now wants Pierre Gasly, and they want to get him out of his Red Bull Racing contract with AlphaTauri, where he, I guess, re-upped earlier this year. So we'll see if that happens.
Helmut did say, they said they're not going to stand in the way of Pierre going to Alpine.
Yeah.
But he says all of our, quote unquote, all of our conditions had not been met yet.
Yeah.
What that tells me is that, this buck up, exactly, which is, again, they lose. And we have to look at this, right, for Alpine. They thought they were going to get Alonso back on a 1-year deal. They lose him. They do a desperate, if Piastri knew that he was leaving and had made it known prior to everything that he was leaving, that he already had his agreement with McLaren in advance. That's 2 drivers down, and then you're adding the costs that, because then all of a sudden we got the public release. Yeah. Well, the cost for the CRB too.
Mm-hmm.
He's mentioned that as well. That suddenly got out there. Somebody made sure to leak that out. So I'm sure it was somebody from McLaren who said, let's tweak them a little bit back so they know that they had to pay us money in wasting, quote unquote, I guess the idea of them wasting time.
Yeah, lawyer fees.
And then you get into, obviously, at this point now, there's going to be even more cost to Renault just to get Pierre Gasly out, and you're bringing him in, and supposedly the two, everybody knows this, the issues between, past issues between Esteban Ocon and Pierre,
going back to the karting days,
exactly. And then you have to get into, them both, Ocon saying, and then publicly kind of Ocon also saying, kind of publicly stumping for Mick Schumacher, who's also out of contract, obviously, this season, and he's good friends with Nick. And how do you look at that if you're Alpine, as you're looking at potential candidates? To me, I like Mick a lot, and he's showing form, but Pierre is more of a finished product at this point.
Yeah.
From a pure competitor, iron sharpen iron perspective, to me, it makes sense. But all it's going to take is the first couple of, and Esteban, we know Esteban is aggressive, and that won't take long before the two of them may have an issue. So even if they do get Pierre in as the second driver, they know what the story is going to be. The potential for fireworks going into 2023 and going forward for Alpine. That being said, they work together. You got two guys who have won Grand Prix, who do have pace, who can and potentially, they could make a lot of noise over the next few years for
a lot of money. They're both French. We're the only French team on the grid.
Exactly. Again, that's, I'm sure, from a public relations wise, after getting egg on their face with Fernando and getting egg on their face over with the Piastri situation, the way to sort of paper that over a little bit is to have that all French lineup and be able to roll that thing out going into next season and saying, hey, look, nobody else we got how many other people. McLaren has no Grand Prix winners. They have 0. One has no experience whatsoever. And Lando still hasn't won one yet. We've got 2 drivers who have won at least one Grand Prix. So who has the who has the upper hand? And you add to the mix too, Otmar, for the criticisms that he gets. If we look at how the team has been running in season, I think they've run extremely well.
Alpine. Yeah, I think their car's been good. They've made good decisions. Yeah.
Right. And, for the most part, with the exception of, the issue that happened at Hungary between Ocon and Alonso, I think for the most part, it's been a pretty good relationship, and he's done a pretty good job. And Racing Point used to be, and Force India was always that scrappy, tough team, and Otmar did run it pretty tightly. And for people who obviously want to take their cracks at Otmar, I would say he's got more record of success than not in this sport. And I think at least from a day-to-day operation, from the big picture standpoint, maybe you could say that's where things need to get cleaned up. But I think from an operational standpoint, from racing on a race-to-race basis, there's no question the Alpine is. And it's not just it's a 20-point gap between the two teams, but I feel like also that there is even more of a wider the gap of the teammates and how well they're driving versus what's going on in McLaren. And they didn't put together, let's face it, at the end of the season, at the end of the day, McLaren did not put together a great car this year. Both drivers have not been happy with that car.
No, it has not been good. And the progress that they made and the regulation changes have not helped them at all. I mean, when Ocon was at Racing Point with Perez, with Checo, I mean, there was a lot of incidents there. I remember Checo getting on team radio at Azerbaijan. I think it was 2017, I want to say, turn 2. Says, oh, what did Esteban do? He took me out. He put him right into the wall.
But that's the thing is, and Esteban presents, as many of these guys do, especially in the age of social media, they present particularly well. He's very charismatic. He has the story, obviously his backstory, as we all know, for those who watch Drive to Survive, he's not a rich kid. He kind of had to come up, scrapping and clawing. He's got a little bit of spoon. A little bit of a no silver spoon for him, and he's got a little bit of a Lewis Hamilton kind of upbringing in this circumstance. In that, it wasn't part of a family that had previously been part of F1 or anything along those lines, and he has that edge to him though too.
Yeah,
and it's still, and again, we see it come out, and we do for and however this is going to go between him and Pierre next season, if it happens. Is going to be a fascinating thing to watch if that ends up being it. But if it ends up being Mick or it ends up being Danny, I'm just feeling like more and more now the chances we're getting back to Danny. I have my concerns about whether or not he's even going to be in a seat next year.
Yeah, I think he's taking a year off.
I get that. I just have that feeling. And
he needs it.
And with the reports also with Haas looking at Antonio Giovinazzi.
Yep.
Potentially to bring him in to pair him as well. I'm sure from a cost perspective, it's a lot easier than bringing Danny Rick in. But again, it also comes up to the risk I think we're talking about here with Danny Rick is going to be if he does take the year off. The problem is that he doesn't have the kind of resume and cachet that Fernando Alonso had when he left and came back.
Yeah, I mean,
he's had a world championship. He had all those, the records and everything else. Danny's a 7. I guess he had 7 times, 8 time counting Monza, 8-time Grand Prix winner. But
Alonso's a 2-time champion, could have been 2 other times.
In this case, you can give him a little bit, and the expectation him coming back wasn't like, whoa, it was like, let's see what he does coming back, and he impressed everybody with his pace coming back. Yeah. Danny, on the other hand, unfortunately is coming into this thing now as a depreciating asset. I hate to use that phrase.
Stock is dumping. Yeah, it's time
exactly, and you have to look at your other teams. At that, I think Haas definitely sees value in him, but it would be a case where, again, if he really wants to keep a seat in Formula One for next year and what type of role he's looking for, and he's kind of said that this weekend that I want if the team gives me the opportunity for the quick win, I would prefer to go there. Obviously, that's coding for Alpine, please.
Yeah.
But going to a team to help develop drivers like Haas, or in that case, or go to or more specifically in this case, Williams. I'm sure Williams is very interested in him as well.
Yep.
And I think that would be an interesting pairing to see him and
him and Albon.
Him and Albon would be actually a very interesting pairing to help develop Albon. But
that'd be the best one since
2 former Red Bull was in that case too, right?
Yeah. That'd be the best Williams pairing since Bottas and who else was there?
Stroll?
No. Even before Stroll, because I wouldn't count Stroll as a driver, especially at that time.
Well, they had Massa.
It was Bottas and Massa, Felipe Massa.
Yeah, but Massa was definitely, and he's kind of, again, Danny's kind of getting into that
same there,
sort of territory in this case. But maybe he may be the right thing, because if he does take the year off, and some of the younger drivers aren't quite setting the world on fire, then then his opportunities may be better next year coming back, and he can sell himself saying, I needed that, I just needed to clear my head, needed to
reboot
up, do other things, and come back and try to see what I can do. And not call it, it's not, him retiring like Fernando said he was retiring and then decides to come back.
Yeah.
But that's his consideration there. Again, that's where other teams looking at and going, and unfortunately Christian kind of greased the wheels on that too, with him saying he just looks beaten. He looks, and I hate this. There's times I wonder where with Christian, where it's a case of genuinely feeling bad for Danny, and also the other double edge of you should have never left. This is what happens. You should have never left. And I think there's a bit of resentment because, again, Red Bull got probably they could have been competing a year or two sooner against Mercedes.
Yeah. Had they not gone through the Gasly, Albon.
They don't do Gasly, they don't do Albon. Yeah. And they have a driver capable, like Danny staying. But again, that would have been a case where Danny would have to sort of accept the fact that he's
1B role.
Minimum a 1A.
Yeah.
And that happened. And to him, his interpretation of, I was in Seb's shadow. Now I want to be the lead guy. Then Max suddenly appears.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
and Max gets accelerated into the
fast, and he feels a certain way about it.
Yeah. I don't blame him. Let's pick the podium for Zandvoort. I've got my 3 picks in. You give yours. I have mine already written down. So
yeah,
who do you got coming in third?
Third for this one. I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Hamilton. I think he's going to be on the podium. I'm going to say P3 for him. I'm going to go P2. A recovery run this week for Charles Leclerc. I think Leclerc is able to get P2, and then Max is going to. I think Max, unless there's a massive error of some kind, which you never know. But Max is, to me, is P1 for this one.
We have the same 3 drivers. I have Leclerc coming in third. I have Hamilton 2, and I have Max winning his home race once again, like he did last year. Yeah. All right, let's wrap it up. We'll be back next week. We'll recap Zandvoort, and we'll preview the Temple of Speed Monza week, which is always a fun one. And there's always fireworks there as well. So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. That'll help other fans of motorsport and Formula One fans find this podcast. For Anthony Mangione, I'm Jason Martinez. We'll talk to you next week on another brand new episode of Stick to F1.